Good day, viewers. I'm Erika Pretorius. Welcome to Lesson 5 for History Grade 10 and 11 in the NAMCOL series. Our topic for today is the struggle for Namibian independence and its consequences. More specifically, the role of the Church in the liberation and armed struggle. After watching this lesson, you should be able to discuss the various forms of resistance with regards to the Church. In this lesson, the Church refers to a collection of Christian faiths rather than any particular faith. In Namibia, during the struggle for independence, the Church refers to these faiths supported by African Christians. Viewers, we need to know that the Church played an important role in the resistance against apartheid. Most churches in Namibia supported the liberation struggle. Some of these churches include the Anglican Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and the Catholic Church. Each of these spoke out against the injustices in Namibia. Now let's look at the Church and the armed struggle. SWAPO decided in 1966 to adopt a new way of resistance, which was known as the armed struggle. This became a challenge to the Church because its teachings were against the use of violence, and it's believed that the struggle should be dealt with peacefully. Some churches could not agree with the violence and could not support an organization such as SWAPO, which believed that war was the only way to gain independence. The Church was against apartheid but chose not to support or condemn the armed struggle. Despite the dangers of opposing the apartheid rulers, many people in the Church stood up against the harsh treatment and laws that were implemented by the South African government. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in Namibia played a very important role in resisting apartheid and the struggle for liberation and independence. The Evangelical Lutheran Church had been called the Evangelical Lutheran OVAMBO-KAVANGO Church, ELOC, before 1984. It changed its name to the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Namibia in 1990. Let us look at the open and pastoral letters. Now, before we start, an open letter is a letter that is written and published for everyone to see. A pastoral letter is a letter that was written by a pastor or bishop to the church for its members to read. During the 1960s, there were two occasions when letters were sent by the church groups to the South African government. In 1964 and 1967, the two largest Lutheran churches in Namibia both sent pastoral letters to the South African government to warn them that the confiscation of land as proposed in the Odendaal plan would lead to chaos and unhappiness in Namibia. These letters were ignored by the South African government and the forced removal of people took place. People were removed to the Bantustan. Let's look at Evangelical Lutheran OVAMBO-KAVANGO Church referendum. A referendum is when people vote for or against an issue. In 1971, the International Court of Justice ruled that South Africa's occupation of Namibia was illegal. The South African government, under the leadership of Prime Minister John Vorster, asked ELOC for its opinion on the International Court of Justice judgment. They thought that ELOC would be against the judgment. Foster believed that ELOC supported apartheid policies. Bishop Leonard Nangolo Awala and ELOC decided to hold a referendum about the International Court of Justice's ruling to find out what the people thought about it. The people voted in support of the International Court of Justice ruling. They wanted Namibia to become an independent country and South Africa's violent occupation of the country to end. Awala felt the people who voted had the right to know the outcome of the referendum and therefore made the results known through an open letter. He also wanted the world to know that Namibians do not support South African rule. Here we have pictures to show you how the International Court of Justice, Bishop Leonard Awala and Prime Minister John Foster looks like. This brings us to the open letter. After the 1971 referendum, an open letter was sent to John Foster from many of the churches. It was written by Bishop Awala of ELOC and Pastor Petrus Govasep of Elsen. The letter criticized the South African government for its apartheid policies, the colonial occupation, and the human rights abuses in Namibia. The church wanted to repeat its opposition to South African rule and apartheid policy. The letter also indicated that the church understood the suffering of its members and it would support the resistance struggle. The letter received worldwide attention. There were certain demands that the church made in the open letter. These demands were the following: 1. Independence for Namibia. 2. An end to intimidation and violence. 3. The abolition of the Group Areas Act. 4. Freedom of expression for all. 5. Voting rights for all. 6. The end of job reservations. 7. The end of the contract labor system. Now, let's look at the close cooperation between the churches. In 1974, the Ecumenical Christian Center, the ECC, was established in Windhoek. It aimed at uniting the various black churches and strengthening the opposition against the South African rule. The members of the churches of the EEC were the AME Church, the Anglican Church, ELOC, Roman Catholic Church, the German Evangelical Lutheran Church joined for a while but withdrew when it felt the ECC was too involved in politics. Now, let us look at the attempt of the South African government to repress the church. After a church delegation under the leadership of Bishop Awala visited Foster in April 1973, the South African government became more repressive towards the Namibian churches. Some measures were taken to control the churches. In 1972, the Anglican bishops Colin Winter and Richard Wood were expelled from Namibia. More church leaders and missionaries were closely watched and their movements were restricted. South African agents tried to cause disunity amongst the churches. Church leaders were refused visas to enter or leave the country. Several church properties were destroyed in the 1970s. ELOC's printing press at Unipa was destroyed in a bomb blast. The press was used to publish pastoral letters and other correspondence of the church. The same thing happened again in 1980. These were ways in which South Africa tried to control the church. Here are pictures of the two Anglican bishops who were expelled from Namibia, Bishop Colin Winter and Bishop Richard Wood. Remember, the church was against violence but supported the resistance movement. The church made several efforts, such as the open and pastoral letter, to put an end to apartheid. The church also drew the attention of the world to the struggle of the Namibian people. The church suffered under the apartheid regime through the expulsion of leaders and destruction of church property. Here are some final tips in answering questions in paper 1. Discuss how the church stood up to the South African apartheid regime. When answering an A question in paper 1, you need to consider the following. Mention 5 or more facts about the events. When mentioning dates, make sure you mention the correct dates. When mentioning figures or amounts, make sure you mention the correct figures or amount. You get a mark for every correct fact. Level marking is not applied in this question. Here's an example answer for the question in this lesson. The church stood up against the apartheid regime in various ways. It first of all did not condemn the armed struggle, nor did it support it, because its teaching was that of peace and not war. It wrote 2 letters to the South African government during the 60s to warn the South African government that the confiscation of land through the Odendaal plan would lead to chaos and unhappiness in the country. These letters were written in 1964 and 1967. The South African government ignored these letters and implemented the policies of the Odendaal plan. In 1971, through the ELOC referendum, the church showed its unhappiness with the South African government and its apartheid policies. Bishop Awala made the results of the ELOC referendum public through an open letter, which again showed the opposition of the church and its members against the South African government. In 1971, Bishop Awala and Pastor Petrus Govasep wrote an open letter to the South African government. The letter criticized the apartheid policies of the South African government. The church made their demands in the open letter of 1971, which include independence for Namibia and an end to the intimidation and violence, amongst other things. Even though the church itself faced repressive behavior from South Africa, it stood firm in its struggle against apartheid and the South African rule in Namibia till independence. That's all that we have for today. Until next time, keep well.